The mistakes that people make about podcasting, even before they even start podcasting. The mistakes around thinking it's hard to find the right hosting platform of where to put your podcast, or it's really expensive to get started, or thinking you need a lot of gear, or that the editing is hard, or another top mistake, no one's going to listen to me, or the mistake of not being able to find a podcast guest, or the mistake of thinking it's too hard to be natural, or the biggest mistake, which is not starting because they're thinking about it too long. Ooh, there's a lot of them. And that's what we are diving into today in this mini series about podcasting. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Christine Lozada. This is Everyday Badassery, and this is a mini series within that podcast. I'm helping people who are creators or small business people to be just 1% better at being a badass creator today than they were yesterday. And in this mini series, within the series, we are talking about podcasting, and in which there's a bunch of episodes. So if this is the first one you're dropping in on, make sure you check out the ones prior to this, because Ted Cragg has so much value to offer. I love him. Make sure you check the show notes. There's a ton of info in there that a lot of people miss. And if you miss it, damn, you missed it. Make sure you check the show notes for helpful info, other resources, and how to find Ted Cragg. With that note, let's get into the top mistakes that most people make about podcasting. Let's bring in Ted.
I'm Ted Cragg. I'm with Quick Edit Podcasts, and it's a pleasure to be here talking some more about some great podcasting tips with Christine.
Heck yeah, and not just podcasting tips, but the top mistakes that often prevent people from starting or prevent people from reaching their potential. And we're going to dive straight in with the first one, which is most people don't ever start the podcast because they spend too much time thinking about it. They keep thinking and planning for it, and they never actually start. Ted? What would you suggest they do? Is 5.
Right. The answer to that is spend a little bit of time thinking about it. At least a few minutes, do a little bit of thinking, planning, what's your objectives and who this is for, and then start. You really don't need to do more than that, because you're never going to get anywhere. You're never going to improve and learn from your experience until you start. You got to take that action. And you and I know, and lots of people listening, when you press record and you publish that first episode, you're not going to get a whole lot of listens, and that's great. It gives you the chance to just grow and start to learn from that experience. So do a bit of planning and then press record.
Yeah, and think about it in these two ways. If you already have a product or a service that you know you want to drive people to, I like to tell people to focus in on this will be one of the most impactful ways for you to grow your business in selling your products or services. Go after it and keep that in mind the whole time, and let that ignite what it is you're trying to say, get them to do, like being able to just start the podcast. And if you're someone who's starting and you're like, well, I don't have a product or service, don't forget, my podcast started as a passion project. And while this is not the most positive way to think about it, as a creator who's seen by lots of people, the way I think about what I do now is if 100 people per day, which is sometimes what I deal with, message you about how much they hate your guts or hate your content or fill in the blank, what message would you be giving to the world that it does not matter what other people say, because you know that you need to be telling that message to the world? And if you think of it from that perspective, when people are opposing you, what could you potentially be talking about or saying that will drive you forward, because you know it comes from your heart and it comes from within, and it's the right thing for you to be saying or doing? And let that get you to just start immediately. You can always pivot. Make sure you listen to the first podcast episode with me and Ted. We talk more about that then.
And there's people who need that message. That's another key part, right? Like, you don't know them yet. You're going to find them. There's people who need that message.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into niching down. But you think about, like, that's your target listener. And who cares about all the other fluff and the people, the haters and all that? It's the people who need your message. And that's your core. That's who you're talking to.
Yes.
Go out and find them.
Every single time I get like all those unhappy messages, I'll just put it that way, For the one person that I help, it always makes it worth it. It always
Mm-hmm.
makes it worth it. Think about that. All right, here's the next mistake. You ready? A lot
Next.
of people think it's really expensive to do
Mm.
a podcast. And actually, and when I compare it to other things I do, it's one of the least expensive
Oh yeah.
things. What would you say, Ted? How much money you got?
I I'm gonna say it costs about $12 unless you happen to get earbuds that came with your cell phone, which you probably did,
It's
in
mine.
which case it's essentially free, or you already paid for it. But that's what we're talking about here is a very, very low barrier to entry to get started. You can always upgrade. You can get nicer microphones and equipment and recording software and all the rest. But to start, all you need, and we talked about this in the first episode, you just need a microphone that you can plug into your phone, plug into your computer, something that's wired, and that gets you started.
I totally agree. Because even for things like if you want a video podcast, use your phone. Just get
Yeah.
some kind of microphone. And oftentimes, people will just use, if you have an iPhone, the headphones that came with it. And that can be, especially when you first start, good enough. Because that actually leads to this next part where people will say, well, doesn't it cost a lot of money to host your podcast or to push your
Hmm.
podcast out? And it can, there's lots of options, and we'll talk about a few that of where you can have your podcast hosted at. But I used to use Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout was great for me at that time. It's a
Hmm.
service that pushes it to all platforms. And now I use previously called Anchor, but now called Spotify for podcasters. And it's a free service that pushes my podcast to everywhere it needs to go. And so I actually,
Yep.
for me, I don't pay anything for hosting anymore. Plus, I put it to YouTube, and there's no cost for me to put it to YouTube. I also put some episodes to Facebook, no cost over there also. But what are some of the other options that people have for where to host their podcast?
Right. Spotify isn't the only free one. Podbean's another good alternative, and they have a
Mm.
free entry level package, basically, where anybody starting off gets all that they need. Because there's limits, obviously, with frees to like how much storage space you get and bandwidth and downloads. But with Podbean, it's quite generous. Like it's more than enough to get started. And the whole point is that as you grow, you add more episodes and you learn more and you get better. Your audience gets bigger. Well, now you might have to start investing in more storage space, more bandwidth, as they call it. And their next package is like $9 a month. So we're not talking 50 something dollars a month here. And that's Podbean. Buzzsprout does still have a free one. There's where they'll delete your episodes after 90 days. If you're just trying to do a really short type thing that's going to disappear, or maybe you upgrade a course and move it somewhere else. But if it's that kind of short term, you do get some free options with Buzzsprout. And some of the other podcast hosting services do offer like free. Again, the whole point just to get you started, to get it going, and then you either upgrade within that same platform, or you can always bring your podcast to a different podcast host, which does take a few steps. It's definitely not impossible by any means, and that may be because they have better services or better inclusions, packages, pricing, statistics, all that kind of stuff. But that's a later problem. Right now, we just want to get you to start.
Yeah. And I think that was a perfect example of an answer that Ted can give and why I love him for podcasting. So make sure you check that info in the show notes because he knows a lot. But
Yeah.
one of the other things is a lot of people, including myself, and I don't know a lot about them, know or have heard of places like Libsyn or
Hmm.
Riverside or some of these more. I don't even know if, like, I don't know if I should call them fancy, but I know that they are more expensive services. But I'm curious, Ted, in your opinion, are they necessarily better or the right choice for people who are starting out, that is?
Well, I'll just do one thing. Riverside is a recording platform like StreamYard and Zencaster and
Mm.
Podcastle and so
Hmm.
on. They don't yet, at least, they don't do the podcast hosting. So what some people do, especially if you want to invest some more money and better quality and all the rest, you pay monthly membership for something like Riverside, where you would record your podcast, is presumably if you have guests, remote guests,
Mm.
but then you need to host the podcast where you actually get the whole thing set up on a different service. And that's where we're talking Buzzsprout and Podbean and Libsyn and Spotify and so on. So that's the difference between the two. But yeah, it really depends on kind of what your overall objective is and what you need to do right now to get started.
Yeah, see, that goes to show how much I even knew about things like Riverside. All right, I am no longer overwhelmed by that, but the next thing
Good.
that overwhelms and is a mistake that a lot of people made, we kind of talked about this with the inexpensive headphones, is just
Mm.
trying to buy more gear. And we do talk about gear in our previous episode, but beyond the microphone, uh, do you feel like there's anything for people who are first starting out that they have to get?
That they have to get? No. And here's my pro tip is that it's not so much about the microphone that you use, as I say, ideally as long as it's plugged in, it's the space that you record in. I have a nice microphone here that's, $100 or something, and it's wired and all the rest. If I was recording this or you were recording yours in a big cavernous room with high ceilings and hardly any furniture or carpets or curtains or any of that kind of stuff, the sound would be bouncing all over the place. And a really nice microphone would still make you sound all echoey and reverb because of the space you're in. So you can take one of those $12 dollar store type counter checkout, earbud microphones as a minimum level at least. But if you were to record that in a little kind of cubbyhole space, closet, a bedroom with lots of furniture, you're already ahead of the game. Most people don't bother doing that. Like they
Yeah,
just kind of set up and record wherever they are in their kitchen or something. And that's what people notice. They won't notice so much if the microphone quality is a little less than, some 5-star level, but they'll definitely notice if there's reverb and there's echo and it sounds like they're in this big cavernous room. Even if you're not really, like you don't think you are, but the listener thinks you are. That's what comes
yeah.
across.
And my tip for that, especially if you're traveling and on the go, is
Mm,
whether you're pretending it's Halloween and you're a ghost or you're pretending you're having a sleepover, throw the blanket over you, and
yeah,
that can be a short one and a crutch that can be
yeah.
helpful. Especially when I was getting audio clips of people for other projects, I'll have them do that if we're in a space where you just can't deal with how cavernous it will make it sound. But
Hmm.
the other thing that I would say is a top mistake that I've noticed is that people have or will buy these beautiful microphones and then will put their face 3 feet away from it. And it's
Mm,
like, no, you actually want to speak close to your microphone and not
yep.
have it 10 feet, 3 feet away from you.
Most likely, there's a quick caveat, and I really don't want
Mm,
to get too technical, but there are two types of microphones. A lot of people listening, watching have probably heard of ones called the Blue Yeti, and
mm-hmm.
that is a condenser microphone. And that is designed for studio space and professional studios. It's very, very sensitive. And the whole point, the mentality is that you can be sitting largely anywhere in that space, a treated space, and it'll sound fairly equal. It'll really pick up your voice and nice and clear. That for the average podcaster, who even if they're sitting in their bedroom and there's, it's a fairly muffled type room, it's going to hear your chair creaking. It's going to hear dogs barking down the street, ambulances driving by way outside. Whereas my mic and your mic, most people's mics we recommend are dynamic microphones. So look for that when you're ordering. If you want to go for the $80-$100 microphone, when you're at that point, look for the dynamic microphone. It'll say what kind it is. And that means that I have to speak right into it. When I go back like this, I'm
Mm.
about a foot or so away from the microphone. I'm quieter right now,
Oh, that
right?
sounds huge
Right?
difference.
Yeah. So this is where you don't want to sit right up like this with your mouth on it, like you're singing. I hope I didn't hurt anyone's ears doing that. But this is the difference. You do have to learn. We talk about preparation and, the difference between jumping right into it versus taking 2 years to do it. Do that little window of preparation, which includes microphone technique. All you have to do is get the right microphone, a dynamic mic, and know how to use it, which means you place yourself roughly 3 inches or so from the microphone, and then you'll be just the right level, and it won't pick up too many of those popping sounds, and you'll have consistent volume going across, and then they just get used to it. You build a habit of sitting in that position.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have way too much champagne to purchase in my life over Blue Yetis, but maybe one day I will eventually give in. We'll see.
Yeah.
The next thing is, and actually this has to do with microphones, but one of the top mistakes that people make is that they think editing is too difficult. And a
Mm.
perfect example is right now I'm watching the timestamp, like as we're recording, I'm just watching the timestamp. And if something were to happen, like a dog barks or his chair creaks, some crazy, distracting way. I'm just going to note that time so that I know when I go into the edit, I will do my best to silence that small section. And these
Mm-hmm.
are really small edits that I'm doing. We talk about editing in a previous podcast. But what would you say for the person who's like, like I can't get started. Like the editing is just too hard. Like, what would you suggest?
The number one tip to do when you're editing, when you're even setting up the whole recording of your podcast, make sure you're recording on two separate audio tracks. And that includes if you're doing video. We're recording video right now. This is recorded, well, two video tracks, but baked into that is the audio. And that makes the editing really possible because if everyone's merged, if you have two or more speakers onto one single track, if I'm talking right now, if something happened in your background right now while I'm talking, I could take your track and simply mute it, like you're talking about, and silence it, and it's done in a second. But if we're on the same track and that happens, I can't really do anything about it. Yeah, there's programs to kind of clean it up, but there's only so much you can do. So there's techniques you can stop and restart your sentence and stuff like that. But to not even worry about that, have the two separate audio tracks. And you can find that in all these programs we're talking about, Riverside and StreamYard and even Zoom. You can make sure that they're recording on two separate tracks. And from then, when you're finished, if you have two speakers, then let's assume you have two audio tracks or video to download, and you bring them into your editing software, and then they line up together, and then you can carry on from there. Now, we're not getting into the nuts and bolts and all the details of how to edit here right now, but there's always a learning curve, and it just takes some practice to kind of identify, waveforms and what words look like and where loud noises show up in the editing track. So yeah, it just takes some practice to get used to it, but it's well worth doing to just clean up at least some of those fundamental things to make it a better listening experience for your listener.
Yeah. And even if you're hearing all of this and you're getting overwhelmed by like, oh my gosh, what was the name of that software? What was the name of this? Make sure you check the show notes. And don't forget, these are things where even for me, I have shifted over time and just tried different things. I've tried different microphones. I've tried different
Yeah.
ways of editing and different editing software. Yes, we're using StreamYard today, but I've tried other things in the past. And there are a lot of options, and whatever it is you choose, you're never stuck for life in that thing.
Yeah.
Because the next top mistake that people make is that they just think everything about podcasting takes too long. And part of that has to do with, this podcast episode, for example, right? This is not a 10-second TikTok. This is not a
No.
5-second Instagram reel. This is a longer form piece of content. And so it comes with the misperception that this can be one of like the lengthiest things that you will spend time creating, when I would actually, or I don't even want to tell
The
you how much
opposite.
time I spent on a 6-second Instagram reel, Ted. It's disgusting. You might barf in your mouth.
I
Actually,
can
maybe
imagine.
it'll make you feel so bad for me. You'll buy me a Blue Yeti. So for the
I wouldn't do that to
misperception
you.
of people who think it just takes too long, I would say my suggestion where people get hung up would be, one, like, first of all, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, like, what am I talking about? Like, what's the topic? Like, how long do I talk for? And it's like, come back to like, who are you speaking to?
Mhm.
What goal do you have? Like, what action do you want them to take? And so therefore, what is the message that needs to happen? And for me, I don't put a time limit of, it's not allowed to be less than an hour. It can't be 15 minutes. It can be the amount of time that makes sense for you. And then you can
Yeah.
choose the level of editing, or do zero editing at all. Send it over to Ted. He has a fantastic service for that. And then just keep it simple and get your message out. And a lot of people that I know who first start will do bare minimum editing and just blast it to the world. And does not take a whole lot of time. What would you say, when you have any top tips, Ted?
Well, what's the objective of that specific episode too? Because that's often where we get overwhelmed. It's like, well, we're trying to sort out all these ideas in our head and what we're trying to accomplish. So, if you have at least an objective, a topic, a theme, an action step in this particular episode that you're recording, which is essentially what we're doing here. We're talking about top 10 mistakes, the errors people make thinking about podcasting. So that gives you a bit of grounding when you inevitably you probably get off topic or you wander and you want to bring it back yourself as the host, and maybe you're guiding your guest, of course, too. So just to kind of keep things back on track. Now, I always say it's great to do a little bit of preparation, which again we did for this. We didn't do much. We did enough that we had our list and we chatted about it a bit. And if that takes a few minutes or something, that might be all you need. It really gives you some peace of mind to know that you did a little bit of that preparation. You have a bullet point list or something. It's like sitting right next to you. You can always flip back to it. And the beauty of podcasting, unless you're going live, and live is a whole other thing. There's some room and space for that spontaneity. Most of the time you're not live, you're just recording on your own time, which means you can pause. Mm-hmm. You can say, I'm just going to pause for a second, sip of water, just go over my notes for a second. Whether it's easy to do if you're by yourself, especially if you're with a guest, of course, you can say, let's take a quick pause. That stuff is really easy to edit in post-production, but it gives you that focus and just kind of recenter to carry on for whatever it is, another 10, 20 minutes or something.
Yeah. And that preparation and that resetting, like it's all things that are available to you. It doesn't have to be a perfect one take. Right. Mm-hmm. And even the amount of preparation that Ted and I did, like it was just a couple minutes chatting through this list so that we're aligned before we pressed record. And if you're watching today's episode, you're going to look at me right now, looking over at my list, which is, we just talked about how it takes too long. And the mistake that people make is that they think it's too hard to find guests. And and the other mistake is that guests are even necessary. And so I don't want to overwhelm with too many things all at once, but there are plenty of ways to find guests. There are even services out there that you can find guests. But actually, hold on, let me give you an example of like how I found Ted and why I'm doing this episode series. And so for me, I started with what's the point, right? The point of this mini series within my larger podcast is to help people to be more 1% more badass in their creator business or their small business. And I know that the power of podcasting is there. That was my original podcast episode with Ted. And as a result of that, so many people have come to me saying, I know I want to do this. I really want to do this, but I'm honestly, in the word I hear the most is I'm scared to do this, or I'm overwhelmed to do this. And so I knew that I wanted to bring in Ted and, hey, let's talk about this broken down way of conquering each of these topics with where to start, what gear do you need, how to edit, and then sharing this next session, what are the top mistakes that people make. And I found Ted through a group that I'm a part of, Location Indie and Camp Indie. But I mean, I could have just found Ted online. There are website services that help you to find guests. Whether you're looking just to be a guest, maybe you can practice in that way before you get started, or to help you find guests that are relevant to the topic you're looking for. But I would say also, I'm curious your opinion on this, Ted, people have never said no to me to podcast. Because think about that. I am saying, hi, I would like your voice, your face, your message being pushed to my audience. I will take all the work on. I will edit it. I will do the SEO. I will post it to my platforms. And you literally just have to show up and speak in a very
deliver the value.
Way. Deliver the value for whatever time it takes. And no one ever says no to that. Why would you? No. It's great PR for somebody. What would you suggest for someone who thinks that it's too hard to find guests?
One thing I really love about podcasting is a very positive, collaborative environment. Podcasters help each other out. And the best way to grow your show is to be a guest on someone else's show. And you can do that as kind of a quid pro quo thing. They come on yours, you go on theirs, and you share each other's stuff. I mean, even if you have the same audience, you're going to have a different take, a different angle and perspective and objectives from, how you approach that topic, that theme, right? And so people really work together in this space, which means that it's generally more receptive when you do reach out and they don't think you're just spamming or something saying, would you like to come on my show, etc. It can take a bit of effort. I mean, as podcasting grows and grows and people are doing this more, I mean, I found myself that it can take a bit of effort and different points of contact to just get noticed, to get in touch, because you might go to a spam folder or you might reach out to someone and they get lots of messages and they just didn't notice, right? But if you're persistent enough, then you'll probably get a response, and that response will almost certainly be yes, because as you say, why not? It's an easy thing to do. So there's some more strategy and nuance into crafting a pitch of how you really present yourself and to someone to say, this is why you should come on, this is what we'll talk about, and kind of, again, just being a little bit of preparation, a little bit of planning. It can really take just a few minutes, but to really convince them that this is something not just is worth doing, that kind of speaks for itself, but what they're going to get out of it and how they need to prepare and what's in it for them.
And for those creators who are listening to this right now who are big on, and I won't name which platforms, I'm sure you are currently picking your jaw up off the floor because I'm sure you've gotten some kind of request to, hi, can I please collab with you on fill in the blank on those other platforms? And you're like, no, that costs money, or like, no, that's not like, it's not necessarily a collaborative space in the other platforms. Podcasting is really different. And
think about it. You go and do like a collaboration on someone's Instagram and you do a 60-second reel or something. And granted, that might be seen by, I don't know, thousands of people, but you're talking for 60 seconds or maybe 30 of those 60 seconds, right? Compare that to a value-filled 30-minute episode where you really get to talk about something passionately. You do that deep dive. Listeners get to know your personality as the guest, right? And you can just expand on so much that the whole short form, I know there's a place for it and there's good for promotion, yada, yada, but podcasting is where it's at. That's where we really get to know people and ideas.
It's so true. And the finish rate, the amount of a podcast episode that people will listen to is significantly higher than any other platform. And I would actually argue for that 60-second Instagram reel. If you look at the analytics, one of the main pieces of analytics that Meta will give you is how many people watched it for more than 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Yeah. 3 seconds. Yeah. Like, what can you really tell someone? Never mind, a photo is videos. 3 seconds is nothing compared to listening to 25 minutes of that 30-minute podcast episode. It's really powerful over here. And the other thing is just start. If you're getting stuck about guests, do it alone. If you're getting stuck on, but I need a co-host, what's your message? Just go for it. You can get a co-host later, maybe, but just get started, because why not? Don't let others hold you back. Because the next, we got 2 more mistakes for you, with the last one being one that I'm very excited to talk about. This next one is that a lot of people make this mistake of, like, I know I can't be natural on podcasts. I know I can't be natural on video. And when they step into creating with that mindset, of course you're not going to be natural. But what tips might you provide to someone who feels like they have some hesitations about that?
If you have hesitations, and I can relate to that because I've had hesitations. I mean, it's some people just step right in and they're natural. Other people, it takes some practice. Practice really is the best thing. But in terms of in a moment, in an individual time when you're setting up to record, preparation, again, it really comes back to knowing at least somewhat what you're going to talk about, because you can refer back to that and it keeps you grounded. The other thing is the fact, well, we've chatted about it a bit here, but the fact that, especially if you're starting, that you have that small audience, you just don't have the kind of pressure right off the bat. You can always pause, you can always redo things and restart. So it's kind of recognizing that, because it's easy to panic in a sense in the moment, and the anxiety creeps in that, you're performing here and you have to really be on. And there's a point to that, but you can always pause, take that beat, take a breath, and recenter yourself. And I think there's a fundamental point here that you're doing this to enjoy it. And nobody does a podcast. Any podcast you listen to, whatever, that's been around for 2 years or 5 years, whether it's celebrities or whoever, they're doing it because they enjoy it. And they can't wait to record their next episode. It's not a chore. It's not something they're forced to do. And it kind of sounds obvious, but if you get to that place, then you're going to be fine. And you may not get there in episode 1. Probably you'll do that first episode and you think, yeah, this is cool. I could see doing this some more. And hey, maybe it's one of those kind of performance stage fright type things where it's good to have a little bit of butterflies in your stomach, but then that gives you some of that adrenaline. It helps you focus even in and of itself.
Yeah, it's a good thing to be excited. It's a good thing to
Yeah.
be nervous because it also shows that you actually care. And
Mhm.
especially in this format, I can hide how I'm feeling that day in an Instagram photo like that. I cannot hide whether or not I'm excited to actually do a topic or not when I'm on podcast. Like
Yeah.
the what you hear, right? Like you have to be authentic on this platform. I have
Yeah.
three additional tips, but one thing I will say when you hear Ted say, like, do a little bit of preparation, a lot of people might jump into scripting the entire thing. That's too much. It's hard to
That's not a
be,
little bit.
yeah, it's too much. Like it's hard to be natural. It's hard to be
Yeah.
yourself when it's overly scripted, even for this, right? Ted and I spent a couple minutes just thinking through a lot of those top mistakes, writing that list, and that helps to keep us on point. And that's good enough. We talked about this a second ago, which is maybe practice podcasting by being on other people's podcasts. How
Hmm.
can you, without having to be in the main role of the podcast, simply respond and add value in the questions that you're answering? Or
Hmm.
another one is, I always suggest this to people, even before you get the microphone, even before you get anything, just grab your phone and create a voice memo. Create a voice
Yeah.
memo. Pretend that you're doing a 5 minute, 10-minute podcast episode. Just shoot from the hip and try it. Don't ever post it anywhere, and just see. And you don't even have to listen back to it. Just see how it felt and
Mm.
see what felt good and what didn't feel good, and let that drive whatever next step is. I promise those 5 to 10 minutes you spend doing that will be significantly less time than the days, or in some people that I know, Henthorn, this is you, years that you've been thinking about starting a podcast. Like I could just,
Mm.
I have a whole list of names that I can call you out on, but I'm not going to do it. And the last one that I would suggest is, and this is a suggestion that I have, especially for people who've been creating a lot on other
Mm.
platforms, but they're not yet comfortable, especially if you're going to do a video podcast, which I always suggest people do, because why not? You're already creating, is for people who are not used to being on video a lot, start practicing being on video. And here are two ways I do that.
Mm.
One, I get literally over 100 DMs a day. I try to respond to at least just 5 of them through a video message back. Like,
Okay.
oh, like, someone send you a message, just send a quick 5 to 10 second video back speaking to the camera. That is the 1 minute I've spent that day practicing being on video. I
Yeah.
make sure at least one of my story frames on whatever platform it's on, normally Instagram, sometimes even on TikTok stories, is
Mm.
my face talking to the video. And those are often just 10 seconds. And it's just a quick practice every day to start flexing and growing that muscle of becoming
Mm.
comfortable on camera. And if you're comfortable on camera, if you do a podcast without camera, it's even easier. It's even
Yeah. Yeah.
easier. Are you ready for the last one,
Can
Ted? No,
Can
go
I add
ahead.
a little bit to
Of
that?
course. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, here's another little tip. So, I mean, there's video podcast is a thing and it's growing and all the rest, but you don't have to do it. There's some pushback to it, I think, for a lot of the listeners, consumers who want to listen to audio. They don't want to have to sit down and watch a podcast. But here's a tip. When you record, whether it's by yourself or with a guest, record the video, distribute it. It's only an audio podcast. You're not going to publish that video, but then you have the video to create your little promo clips. And that's where people see your face and they get the visual. They can see who's actually talking. It's not just some voice, but you don't have to worry about the whole 45 minutes, whatever it is, going out there and all of that. So you get a bit of both. But it's nice to have that in the bank, to have the video recording, and you can pick some bits and pieces from it.
Yeah. And if you are trying to make this decision of like, oh, should it be audio or video? And if you have hesitations around video, just start with audio. For me,
Yeah.
it's really like a lot of my podcast going back to what's the point? Like, what's the
Mm.
point of the podcast? For me, it was my way of relating with my audience. And one of the most important things for me is being able to look into my eyes. And so, like,
Yeah.
even on some of my podcast episodes that I made the mistake of filming out and about in the world with awful audio, I made a point of, on those very sunny days, removing my sunglasses, because like
Okay.
it was very important to me to really like have my audience be able to look at my eyes. But
Yeah.
it all comes back to, what is it that you're trying to do, right? Which leads to this last favorite question, which is, ain't nobody, here's the mistake most people think, ain't no one's going to listen to me. No one's
Mm.
going to listen to my podcast. Ah, Ted, what would you say for someone who thinks that no one's going to listen to them?
Someone's going to listen. And
Send it to Ted.
well, sure. The first way to think about it is I think we talked about this in our episode there last year. How, if imagine if you were in a room with like 500 people doing some presentation, right? And like, they're listening to every word and they're all right there and they're very present. And 500 people, that's a lot of people. We look at things like 500 views and likes and downloads like, oh, that's nothing. With a podcast, especially, and we know that whatever it is, 90+% have listened through basically the whole thing. That's a very captured
Huge,
audience, right?
huge.
And yeah, sure. When you start your first couple of episodes, you're not going to have a whole lot, but you're going to grow, and you might get to that 500, 700 type download level, and think, well, is that it? Am I going to go anymore? But you're already reaching a lot of people. You really are. So that's one way to think about it. That what are your objectives for growth? You don't have to have thousands of downloads, especially depending on what your objectives are. What are you trying to sell an elite service or something that's only for a real niche down particular audience? It could be a small audience, but they're very motivated to buy, for example, right? Maybe you're just trying to network and get yourself out there. So it depends what your objectives are, but it's really reframing what our expectations are about reach and downloads and all these numbers.
We really get stuck in the numbers, especially
Yeah.
because a lot of those numbers on other platforms are so in everybody's face, right? How
Mm-hmm.
many likes does that post have? How many comments does that post have? And I go back to I'll give two examples. One is what we just talked about with a 60-second Instagram reel on average. Most people will watch, well, 3 seconds of it.
Yeah.
And even if you have 1,000 views at 3 seconds, that's not a lot of time or a lot of value that someone has gotten out of that. Versus if you just have one person watch your 30-minute episode, like how much more valuable is that, right? And the other
Mm.
thing about that is like you are intimately in somebody's ear. And I'm going to give two quick examples from impact that I literally felt. I just got off Virgin Voyages cruise a couple days ago, and two people came up to me. One was a guy named William, and William thanked me for my YouTube videos about Virgin Voyages. And he's like, I was like, oh, where did you travel in from? He's like, I came in from the Bahamas. And I was like, I love Nassau. And he goes, I know. I listened to your podcast, blah, blah, blah. And I
Yeah.
was like, no, 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 but I really love it because blah, blah, blah. And he was like, I know. I listened to that podcast episode. And that we had this conversation about there's nothing about him he didn't know. Or there's nothing about me that he didn't know about me in the
Right.
Bahamas. He knew every
Mm.
place I traveled to, every drone shot I got, like listened to every podcast episode. He intimately knew me and we were able to drop into conversation. And like that was for me, that was cool. Let's
Yeah.
fast forward to another conversation, which is a woman named Maria. She's about 55, 56 years old. And when she first met me, as I went to give her my hand, she took me into her arms and just started crying.
Mm.
She was like, and she named 3 podcast episodes that I had done that had impacted her so much to choose to do the trip she was doing then and to
Yeah.
pursue her work as an artist because it really filled her soul and how it inspired, and then it just went on. And
Mm-hmm.
we ended up, I missed my dinner last night. We ended up having a 90-minute conversation of just like, like talking with each other. What was amazing
Mm.
is, did I know who she was prior to that moment? No. Had she
Yeah.
met me prior? No. She had spent hours with me in her ear
Yeah.
listening to these episodes. And Maria, if you're listening to this now, send me a message and let me know how your art is going. I really want to know. You
Yeah. Me
never
too.
know who you can impact, and this platform is really powerful. So if
Mm-hmm.
you feel like no one is listening and you're looking at those numbers and it's only a small amount,
Yeah.
think about and go look at the big podcasts out there. How many episodes do they have to be able to achieve what they have today, right?
Sure.
Podcasting isn't about creating a singular episode that goes viral. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can, but it's not like other platforms. It's really unique.
People wouldn't really know either. It's not like YouTube and the rest where they see the numbers, as you say. Like you could have a viral episode, no one's really going to know about it. So it changes your whole perspective. It really does on like on these numbers and what people's perception of you, I guess, in your podcast. Someone's listening and they may be thinking this podcast has got to be super popular, quote unquote, with thousands of downloads. You may know the real story, but you know that there's value in every single one of those people that you've connected to, right? That you've reached. So
Yes.
these are the types of things that make the whole thing worthwhile. Why are you starting? We're mostly talking here, I think, today to people who are thinking of starting, who want to start, right? So think about where you're going to be 6 months, 12 months down the road. And that includes if you're going to do some short form mini series type things where you do it in seasons. So you do it not necessarily, week in, week out. Regardless, you're going to have something a year from now, a couple of years from now. And what's that going to do to your life? What's that going to do to the connections and the people, the contacts you make, right? Think about it that way. That's how you should frame doing a podcast. And then everything kind of builds and grows organically from there.
And it's also why you need a call to action or some kind of something you want people to do, which, speaking of which, check the show notes. Ted, where can people find you? And remind us, what do you offer?
Right. So quickeditpodcasts.com is my company. We do mostly focus on demand podcast production and editing. And it's really designed, you don't have to make a big commitment. So if you just need the odd episode done, if you're happy to do some of it yourself, it comes back to your budget and your time and how much you want to invest. You can order whatever you like. What I really love about the software and everything we've set up here is that you can choose the type of order and the service that you need. You put in your payment, you upload the file. I get a message, or my team, we go in and we download the file. We get your instructions. You can tell us what you want us to cut and edit and so on. If not, we'll figure it out for ourselves, so don't really worry about that. But then we turn it around, and within 48 hours, you have your episode. And our goal is to give you something that's not over-edited, that sounds natural and organic, that includes the odd, that's okay. Like, if you do too many of those, it's too much. But every once in a while, that shows character. So we're really conscious of giving you yourself and your guests, making you sound real and natural. And as I say, you turn it all around in 48 hours, you can carry on and publish it and spread your message. So yeah, that's what it's all about.
I love it. Thanks for doing this with me, Ted.
Yeah, it's been fun.
I think about the mistakes that I've made in creating even this podcast, whether it was sacrificing the sound or recording entire episodes, not realizing my microphone wasn't plugged in correctly. So you just have a whole episode of my face talking with no noise coming out. Oh man, the list is long. But the biggest mistake that I have made was I took too long to start this podcast. I should have started this a long time ago. But you know what? I ain't beating myself up about it because I started and I evolved over time, and so will you. Just get started. Make sure you check the show notes to connect with Ted, find his info and services, and also to connect with me. I'm Christine Lozada. I'm at Christine Lozada everywhere. If this episode helped you, please leave a positive review and share it with somebody. It might help. It really does help to distribute this to more people. In the meantime, go forth, go create something, go start your podcast, go forth, be badass, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.